Howdy, and welcome to Brandi's Book Stack. Today, we'll be talking about the books 11 through 20 on Goodreads best-selling books of all time. The first book that we'll talk about is Catcher in the Rye by J.D. Salinger. This is a book I already unhauled, so that may give you a little bit of an indication how I feel about it. I didn't think it was terrible. I rated this about a 3. If you haven't read J.D. Salinger's novel, we follow a young man who's in the midst of some psychological turmoil. He's just gotten kicked out of school, and he's really suffering from a lot of trauma due to the death of his younger brother. And he doesn't handle that trauma in mature ways, as one might expect of a teenager. It really talks a lot about the isolation and loneliness I think a lot of teenagers feel. It's written in a very authentic voice. And I think while it's written in that authentic voice, I still, it's in the authentic voice of a whiny teenager. I don't want to listen to a whiny teenager. And if you're been visiting this channel before, you're probably familiar with the fact that I really don't like dour and dreary books. And Catcher in the Rye is kind of a dour and dreary book. The main character doesn't exhibit a lot of grace or kindness, although he does at times, especially to his younger sister. And I think really that's kind of what tethers him to this world and keeps him from maybe committing suicide or something like that. But it's a very powerful work. It's just not one that I think I would want to read again. Again, great use of language, and it's interesting. It's set. A lot of it is set in New York City. And so you get to kind of live vicariously through the New York City scenes. And it's interesting, too, how it's contrasted his sort of innocence and yet his growing into adulthood and trying to experience adult things. For example, he tries to sleep with a prostitute. That doesn't go very well. And things of that nature that's kind of charming in and of itself, because it's charming to go back in your mind and think about how you were maybe at that time of your life. But again, kind of dour, kind of depressing still, not my cup of tea. That's J.D. Salinger's Catcher in the Rye. The next book on the list is a very divisive book I found, and that's The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I find people either love this book and go really to far extremes about basically using this as like a life manual. And then I find people at the complete opposite end of the spectrum who think this is trite and corny and just don't like it at all. And I may be one of the weird ones because I kind of fall more in the middle. I really enjoyed this book. I gave it a 5-star, but not because I'm gonna model my life after this book. This book is, at its core, it's a fable. It's about a young shepherd who abandons his flock to go pursue his dream. And there's a lot in this book about, if you're not doing everything you can to follow your dream, then maybe it's not really your dream. And I think there's a lot to that. A lot of people, for example, will talk about wanting to write a book or wanting to write a song or do some sort of creative endeavor like that, but they never have the drive to actually complete it or finish it. And I think that's one of the things this book points out, is that if you really have a dream and you care about that dream, then you've got to pursue it. And there's a lot about, again, life is worth the journey. The main character does meet a young woman, and there's a lot of people who criticize this book for the fact that he doesn't abandon his dream to stay with this female character. I'm okay with that. And the main criticism comes because the woman decides to wait for him to accomplish his dream. And a lot of people are really critical of that and say, well, what about her? Why can't she come along? Well, it's not her dream, is the point. And there's a lot about, surrounding yourself with people who support your dream, which the female character in this, the love interest, does support the main character's dream. A lot about, the journey is more important than the destination as well. And I just thought it was charming. It's a charming tale to me. I like a good story, and that's what I feel this book gave me. If you're going to model your whole life off this, and that's probably not a good idea, but as far as just a good story, I really enjoyed it. 5 out of 5 stars. So that's The Alchemist for me. The next book on the list is a book I did not read. As I'm going through these lists, as far as the best-selling books of all time, the quote best books of all time, one thing I don't read is religious works or nonfiction unless it has a particular interest for me. And in this case, this first book is Steps to Christ by Ellen G. White. She was a leader in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, which is a church I do not belong to or ascribe to, and so I just didn't have any interest in reading that particular work. So that was number 13, so we'll skip over that one. Number 14, Lolita by Vladimir Nabokov. I really enjoyed Lolita, and I almost feel kind of funny saying that because the subject matter is problematic. Lolita is about a child molester, and it is told from the child molester's perspective. I think if you read this in any way other than viewing the narrator as this unreliable narrator, as a bad person, I think you're out of your mind. There have been people who have viewed Lolita as a seductive young female. That is not, in my opinion, what Nabokov wrote. Nabokov wrote how a child molester looks at youth and innocence as attractive, and as an unreliable narrator says, oh yeah, she led me on. This girl didn't lead him on, right? This is I think at the beginning of the book, she's 12. A 12-year-old doesn't lead a grown man on. And there's several things in the book that are indicative that the narrator's unreliable. For one, he doesn't call Lolita, if you will. That is not her real name. That is a name he puts on her, and we're never given Lolita's real name. So in that way, he steals her identity. There are other occasions where even the narrator admits some of what he has done wrong, about how there's an instance where her mother dies in a tragic accident, and he ends up adopting her so that he can more frequently molest her. And there's an instance where they move to another town, and Lolita makes friends with some other girls, and she sort of wistfully wishes that she could have the kind of parents and family that these other girls have. And it's the narrator telling us this, and how he feels bad for robbing her of that. Not bad enough to stop, but he does feel bad. So you sort of get that idea as you go along through this book. I think it's fascinating story, and this is a book that's dour and dreary, no doubt, but I still enjoyed reading it. I thought it was just fascinatingly written and a good read. But if you read Lolita and you think Lolita is some sort of young tramp, I worry about you. I really do. And I really don't think that's what Nabokov intended. But most of the people that push, Lolita is a frequently banned book, and that's usually the reason people wish to ban it, is because Lolita does discuss the molestation of a child. But I think it's important to talk about. It's important to discuss that, you know, there is a narrative out there that if a woman is molested, or a young girl in this case, that she must have done something to incite it. And I think Lolita shows us that's not true. That narrative is a false narrative. And that's why I think I like it so much. So 4 out of 5. It's not a full 5. It's still dour and depressing. But I did enjoy it. And I read that one on my Kindle, and I really, really liked it. So next, totally different, is Heidi by Johannes Spirel. I think I'm saying that last name right. If I'm not, feel free to correct me. Heidi is just a glass full of joy in a book form. It is light and sweet and happy. If you wanted to join me on my joyful June, that I'm reading happy and joyful books throughout the month of June, this would be a great one to include. Heidi is a character who is a young girl who is sent to the mountains to live with her curmudgeonly grandfather. And when I say curmudgeonly, everyone in the town thinks he's just a big jerk. And her sister wants to take care of her, but she's sort of young and having to worry about feeding herself, much less feeding, you know, another mouth. So she tramps her up the hill and just dumps her on the grandfather and says, "See you later." And you might think that a child in that circumstance would choose to throw a fit and be sad and not handle it well, but instead Heidi looks at everything with a positive attitude and ends up really creating a close bond with her grandfather and kind of thawing his curmudgeonly ways. And now I will say in this book, there is a character with a disability, and she ends up taking this character up the mountain, and a big criticism, and this is a minor spoiler, a big criticism of this book is that she sort of miraculously heals when she gets up in the mountain. There's a little bit of, well, if you just have faith in God, then everything will turn out wonderful. And I do think that that is a little bit problematic, because real pain and suffering exists in this world. And, you know, a lot of people endure that, and they can pray all they want, but they still have to endure the suffering. And this almost implies that if you just have enough faith, you don't have to. And I don't think that that's true. And I think that can be a harmful narrative in some ways. But outside of that, I think it's a good lesson for us all to take, that if we look upon our lives and the problems and things that we encounter with a positive attitude, it makes all the difference. And so that's Heidi. Next on the list is another book I did not read. This is a bit of an older book, and that is Baby and Child Care by Dr. Benjamin Spock. I'm a little past that point in my life. My children are pretty close to grown. I've got a 13-year-old and a 15-year-old. So I didn't really think I needed to read much more on baby and child care. So, plus I think that information is now a little dated. I think there's still some good information in there, but we'll pass on that one. The next book on the list, number 17, is a dear favorite of mine, and that is Anne of Green Gables. If you've never read Anne of Green Gables, this is another sunshine in book form. Great for a joyful June read if you've never read it before. Even as an adult, this is an enjoyable novel. We follow a brother and sister couple who, have never gotten married, and they live on a farm, and they need a boy to help with the chores. So they decide to adopt an orphan boy. Only problem is a girl shows up unexpectedly, and they just don't have the heart to return her the way one might return a sweater. And in addition to being a girl, she's also this wistful, imaginative, creative mess of a child that really challenges them. But they both grow to love each other and to learn from each other. And it's just so heartwarming, and the nature writing in it is beautiful. 5 out of 5. You gotta check out Anne of Green Gables. All right, the next book on my list is one I read and discarded. I think this one is available in the public domain, though, if you want to check it out. And that's Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. I thought this was just okay. It's a children's book, so maybe, I wasn't the target audience. But I gave it about a 3. This is a story told from a perspective of a horse throughout its lifetime. And it is interesting from the perspective of it gives you a little bit of insight into the treatment of animals at the time, a little bit about life at the time. The book was very influential in the treatment of animals, particularly horses. They used to use a type of rein on horses that was very painful to them, but it made them look pretty and stand up tall and upright. But they eliminated that pretty much throughout most civilized countries because of this book. So it did have a big impact on animal welfare. So that's a positive thing. I just didn't I thought it got a little repetitive and boring after a while. Well, now the horse gone to another owner. Oh, this one rubs him down. Nice. This one doesn't. It just gets a little kind of boring and repetitive. So that's Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. The next one is The Name of the Rose, number 19, by Umberto Eco. This is another one I was a little bit meh on. I gave it a 3. This book is really hard to read. It uses lots of Latin phrases, phrases from other languages like German or French. Sometimes it uses a pidgin that's a bunch of languages put together. I had to use the internet a lot to understand what I was reading. We follow a couple of monks as they go into a new monastery where they're expected to solve a murder. And then as they begin working to solve that murder, other murders occur. And I thought, this sounds super interesting. It's a murder mystery in the Middle Ages. But I just felt like it was kind of flat. And especially, I think it's very male perspective because all the characters virtually are monks, with the exception of one woman who is literally only there for sexual interest. I know they're monks, but they're still a character that is for sexual interest. It does give a lot of history of the time regarding the Inquisition and how that impacted average everyday people as well as people at the monastery. But I felt like the main character is a little bit unrealistic for the Middle Ages, which I hate to say that because Umberto Eco is an expert on that time period. But it seems like he imbued his character with more modern sensibilities, which I just found, he even kind of questions his faith in God, which I just don't think would be all that common at the time because it was, so controversial. Being excommunicated, people really believed they would go to hell. That was considered a terrible sin. I don't know. I just felt like the whole thing was kind of meh. I will say this is one of those cases that the movie is better than the book. I watched the movie with Sean Connery and Christian Slater as the characters, and I thought they were were better than the book. I just thought the book, you know, it's too slow to burn and too many obscure references. It just didn't do it for me. So, next one on the list, at number 20, our final book, is The Eagle Has Landed by Jack Higgins. I really enjoyed this one. I gave this 4 stars. This is an adventure novel that takes place in World War II, and we follow a group of German soldiers who have been given a mission to infiltrate England and kill Winston Churchill. The interesting thing about this book is the amount of sympathy that Jack Higgins has us give to these German soldiers, right? They're the bad guys, right? I mean, they're the Nazis, bad guys. But yet it shows sort of the humanity of these soldiers, how, you know, the Third Reich all had, you know, something over each of them, usually a family member, that ensured their compliance at great personal cost. If they were to not comply with their orders, they would probably have their families tortured. It's very, very well written and pretty quick paced. So I really enjoyed this novel. I thought it was very, very well done. And I like the idea in a war scenario showing the enemy's humanity. I think that's important. It's easy to stereotype, you know, the enemy as other and to strip them of their humanity. But this book did a good job of maintaining it. And I will say the German officers were not the sorts that were committing the atrocities. I will say that much. I don't think you can come back from that. But it did show there were people in Germany that were not like that, and even in the German military who were not like that, but were compelled to serve nonetheless. So that's The Eagle Has Landed. So that is books 11 through 20 on the Goodreads best-selling list. Do you think these belonged? Do you think they deserve to be bestsellers? Have you read any of them? What do you think should be on this list? Let me know in the comments down below. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and click that bell. Bye.